Good to go?
Yep.
All right, so since this is my first time doing a Zoom class on this, I'm not sure how long it's going to take. So we're going to give it a whirl. Anyways, my name is Daniel Berry. I'll give you a little info about myself here in a second. The presentation is going to be on Intro to Night Photography. This photo here was photographed at 2 a.m. somewhere in the middle of Alabama. I was on my way to Florida when I photographed it. So creating night photography. Who am I? So my name is Daniel Berry. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and now I currently reside in Columbia, Missouri. This photo here, luckily I had a chance to photograph a self-portrait. I had a chance to photograph myself in Alaska with the Northern Lights. That's probably one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. So I used to do a lot more traveling than I do now. What schedule I had as a paramedic, so I work 7 days off kind of thing. But now working as a nurse, they won't give me a set schedule, so I'm kind of limited on the amount of travel I can do and COVID restrictions. I was born here in Missouri. I'm married and have 2 stepkids. That was from Halloween last year. So we dressed up this year, just didn't have as good a photo. And we sold that house, so we no longer live in that big a house, which is nice because it was a pain cleaning it. So I work full time as a registered nurse. And this was the first week I actually did not have contact with a COVID patient at work since March. So I was very grateful to not have to deal with that so much. But at the same time, it's a very rewarding yet exhausting career. Before that, I worked full time as a paramedic for 10 years in Columbia, Missouri. And that job just had a ton of ups and downs with it. This photo here was taken right before that ambulance went into service. We changed the design of our ambulance and went from a white ambulance to a black ambulance. And I was like, we need to go photograph this somewhere. So we went to the quad and columns with Jesse Hall in the background. I also had a part-time job on another ambulance service in town. That photo was shot here in Missouri. The background is somewhere up in Alaska. I thought it was pretty cool. Then I worked full-time as a fireman before that. So that's kind of my progression there. So a little about how I started shooting. I started shooting back in 2008 when I was scuba diving. I was like, well, I want to photograph underwater. So I began doing that. I started with the Canon XTI with the kit lens. And from there, it progressed on to other cameras. And I'll get into what I'm shooting now in a little bit. So I just always had a draw to creating art with a camera. That way it creates great memories. Like I said, I have a passion for traveling. My wife and I actually just got back from Oregon last week. We went to Washington and Oregon. This photo here is out in Utah, and it's multiple images put together so I can have the star trail. Recap. All right, here's a little video of some photos of mine. So that's something I actually worked on with photo decks. It was like 4 or 5 years ago. Um, and they put that together for me. Oh, and then traveling can lead you to great places. This is a time-lapse photo because I like to shoot continuously and mainly to do star trails. And then every once in a while, I'll just put a time lapse together just because it's pretty neat to see it as a video. So that's what I did here. And it's crazy to think that over Alaska, how many planes you see fly through there, because there's a lot. So my gear currently that I am using, I am a Panasonic shooter now. I have a Panasonic S1R, a Panasonic G9, and a G15, or Canon G15. That's mainly for other stuff and not night photography. A lot of my traveling now, I actually shoot everything on a Micro Four Thirds because it's lightweight and the lenses are lightweight and it just makes it easier to travel. Full frame cameras are great for traveling as well. They're just heavier and it's more weight on your back hiking and things like that. So I usually stick with just my G9 and I still can create night photography with that just fine. Then I have a multitude of tripods. This one here was sold since then. I took that photo. I have a Manfrotto tripod, an Autorama travel tripod, and then some unknown carbon fiber tripod I bought off somebody very cheap and was like, this works. So I have used trigger trap before in other intervalometers, mainly because when you're shooting at night, you want your camera to stay as still as possible. So if you use a shutter release, or now that cameras have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and things like that, it's nice to be able to use your app to actually make your shutter use it as a shutter release, or like trigger trap has multiple different things you can use, from a quick release to time lapse mode to star trails and things like that. I found it very helpful when I first started out. Nowadays, I usually just use my iPhone, connect it to my camera, and shoot like that. So lens wise, I have a 24 to 105, which is the only full frame lens I have. I shoot at f4 when I shoot at night. And I have a Panasonic for my Micro Four Thirds, the 8 to 18, the 12 to 35, and then the 45 to 200. I also have adapters to fit my Sigma, they're Canon EF lenses, so I have an adapter to fit that to my Panasonic S1R and my Micro Four Thirds. So that way, if I want to get a little wider angle on my full frame camera, I can use that. Then I have multiple headlamps and flashlights and other things that I'll use at night. And then I also use a spider holster and hand strap hiking, because the spider holster keeps it to my body easily accessible, and the hand strap keeps it firmly on my hand if I'm deciding to shoot while I'm walking around. Lighting wise, if I'm shooting portraits at night, I use the Godox brand from Molite, the 8200s. L wire is just like a lit neon wire. They're pretty cool, and you can make some crazy things out of it. I have a photo in here I'll show you later. And then a ton of flashlights, color, where the color temperatures on them are slightly different. So that way I can match whatever white balance I'm shooting with a flashlight that's similar already. That way in post-processing, I don't have to do anything because I rather get everything in camera. So some objectives we're going to talk about are how to set up and obtain results for night photography, how to operate a shutter release cable, be able to operate camera by memory for changing settings, because at night sometimes you will be fumbling around, accidentally hit something, next thing you know your focus is out of whack. Then be able to distinguish a few different types of night photography. And then decide which lenses are best. Be able to explain the different weather conditions you need to consider, understand how to paint with light or light painting techniques, and know why stability at night's important. So some different types of night photography are astro landscape, long exposure night photography with natural light, star and moon trails. Then you have urban versus rural environments and light painting. Here's an example of astro landscape. Thought I had the settings on there. That was shot with a 5D Mark III and I believe a 17-40 at f4, and it was 20 seconds. I think the ISO was 30. It might have been 6400. This was the fire department I used to work at. It was a brand new fire station, and I just set up and photographed it one night while I was at work. And then you have your star and moon trails. As long as to make the circle around the star, you want to point it at the North Star, or also known as Polaris. And there's multiple apps to find where that is and everything. And then if you shoot to the east or the west, you get straight lines. Shoot to the south, you can also get. Then you have urban areas versus rural areas. Obviously, in the rural areas, you won't have as much light pollution as in a city like New York City, as we see there. So trying to get away from light pollution to shoot the stars is your best possible. Then you have light painting. This was an old car of mine. One night while I was working as a medic, I didn't really have much to do, so I had I think it's a 28-inch LED from Harbor Freight, and I just did a 30-second exposure, walked behind my car a few times, walked in front of it, and created this. What to do to start? Is there any questions before we go any further? Is there a way I can see the questions if there are?
There are questions down below, but right now there's been none right now.
Okay.
Anyone have any questions yet so far?
Huh?
It looks like we're good. Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay. So cameras. We all have different cameras. Some people shoot Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, Canon, Olympus. Some people can even, afford the phase ones and things like that. There's also some cameras specific for like shooting stars through telescopes and stuff like that. We're not going to get into that stuff because it's cameras that I don't even understand. They're very amazing cameras, inexpensive. So full frame. Obviously, with full frame cameras, we have the larger sensors, so it captures the most data for us. And in post-processing to pull stars out in more detail, they work great. You still do run into noise with them, not as much as a smaller sensor would. And I used to shoot everything on a 5D Mark III. Then I had a Sony A7R II. I didn't really care for the Sony camera. And then I went with this Panasonic to see how I liked it. You have your crop sensor cameras. They work great. I've shot on that XTI I had. I shot some night photos with it and they came out great. So it really is, a lot of it's what your budget is. Like I said, I have a Panasonic G9, micro 4/3, mirrorless. Works really well for me. And it's what, how do I want to say this? What you have, you can create a night photo with. You just have to know how to get there. Then you have, your mirrorless cameras versus your older cameras with the actual shutters, your full frame, your APCs, and then medium format cameras. I understand these don't shoot night photos that well because they overheat pretty quickly. I would know, can't afford one. Really don't have a use for one where I'm at. And then you have point and shoot cameras. So the Canons, not really that great at night. Sony's, their point and shoot camera you can shoot night photos with. They're also upwards of $1,000 to $1,200. But they also have, I believe, a 1-inch sensor in it, so it's a smaller sensor size as well.
Daniel, we have a question real quick.
Yeah.
What is a Micro Four 3D?
Micro Four Thirds
Yeah,
is
sorry.
it's just a different sensor size. So you have your full frame, which is supposed to be 35 millimeter. Then your APC, which is smaller than that, and then Micro Four Thirds is 4/3. I don't know exactly how to explain it honestly. It's a smaller sensor than an APC one, so it's just a different style camera that's mirrorless. So some camera features you want to make sure that you have or preferred is a manual mode or bulb setting. You can shoot raw files because you can get more data out of them, and high ISO capabilities because the higher ISO, the more light it lets in, the more details you can capture in your photos. Hold on 1 second. I gotta respond to my wife about some COVID stuff. All right, sorry. And then some features that are great to have is being able to add a shutter release. Like I said, nowadays, most of the cameras coming out, they all have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and apps. So you can run everything through that. One thing I learned is depending on how long you're out, it will drain your battery on your phone. Larger sensor size. I used to think that was a really big deal till I got my G9 and was traveling, and I'm capturing photos great with it, I feel. So a lot of times I won't take out a full frame camera with me. But I always like having a backup camera. So usually 2 cameras are with me though, if I'm in town here. And then the ease of changing settings and knowing your camera, because when you're out there, it's dark. And then if you have to turn on your light, like your headlamp or a flashlight or stuff, it takes your eyes so much longer to readjust to the dark after you have just, dilated or constricted your pupils. So a great way is knowing where all your buttons are on your camera so you can change them easily when it's dark out. And lens choices. You shoot with a prime, you shoot with a zoom, manual mode focus or live view focus, and aperture you want to shoot at. It says maximum aperture of 1.4 to 2.8. I've shot, like I said, I shoot the 24 to 105 f4, and I shoot at f4 all the time and create great art, in my opinion. Prime versus zoom. It's really what you can afford. Like I said, I have a Sigma 20 1.8 lens, and it's great, but if the field of view that I want or like the foreground I want isn't that great, I'd rather use a zoom in a little bit and get the photo I want, or the I'll figure out the word. So wider is better. Why? Majority of the time when you're shooting at night, you want a full view of the night sky. Sometimes when you're up in the mountains, you just want to catch maybe one mountaintop under the stars, or maybe the Milky Way's falling right behind it, and that's what you want to capture. So you need to zoom in a little bit. A lot of times when I shoot, I'll walk closer, walk further back, try to figure out where the best place is to get the best composition. So I used to think when I initially made this that I had to have the widest lens available. I had a fisheye lens. I didn't really care for the effects of that. And then I bought my 20 millimeter lens, and I liked it a lot, but it sat in my bag for the last 2 years until last week, because I just shot my 24 to 105 because 24 millimeters was as wide as I really needed. So here's some different lens options. Sigma has some wide lenses. And then Samyang, Bauer, and Ronkanen, they're all the same brand, different names for marketing, and they're manual focus lenses. Tangna has a 16 to 28. That lens is really nice. I had one, but it's very heavy. And one thing with that, if you're shooting low to the ground and your tripod legs aren't out far enough, it will pull your camera over and break stuff. So that's not really fun. And then you have all your name brand wide angle lenses from the camera manufacturers as well. So on camera and lens selection, you want to consider what your intention is for what you're wanting to shoot. Being out in Colorado for all you guys, I feel like you guys have a ton of landscape stuff to shoot the stars with. I was just out in Colorado in July, I believe it was, and all I wanted to do was go outside and shoot. And the wife's like, "You can't do that. We're going to bed." So I didn't really get to shoot anything at night. I did shoot 2 nights though. The place we were staying at had a view of Pikes Peak, so I was able to get a few shots of Pikes Peak with the stars. It says print sizes here. I don't think that's really a worry anymore because there's so many programs to enlarge your photos now. So I think whatever size print you want to make, you're going to be able to make. And then whether you want to do long exposures, star trails, some of those we'll get into about your lens length and at what speed do your lenses start causing you to have star trails and they're not like pinpoint stars. And high ISO to get, pull the stars out more in the Milky Way, extremely wide telephoto, which we'll talk about. And then what can you afford? That was always my big thing. Like I always wanted the new stuff. Like I'd spend money like it was going out of style on new cameras, new lenses, things like that. And then I met my wife and well, I can't do that anymore. So it's really what you can afford, and any camera nowadays that's a SLR can primarily shoot any type of portrait, landscape, night photo that you want. It's just knowing how to post process it kind of at the end and knowing the settings to get everything at. So we'll start talking about where you start at. Getting started. So it all starts before you even go out. You want to make sure your batteries are charged, your memory cards are clear or you have some memory on them, and then you get all your equipment together that you go out with. You want to find the cool location. If you don't know where one is, just go drive around. And then to ask for permission or not. If you don't have permission, it's called trespassing. It's illegal. I wouldn't suggest it. And especially here where I live in middle of Missouri, if you go out to the farm and you don't know who owns it, you're probably going to have somebody show up with a gun because they won't be happy that you're there. So I'd highly suggest if you find something that you're really interested in photographing, that you ask for permission. This barn here, I would have asked for permission, but I'm standing on the gravel road photographing it. So I can't really get in trouble for being on the gravel road. And then make sure you know how to set your equipment up before you go. I always put my camera on my tripod and lock it down tight, making sure that my camera's not going to fall off the ball head. That way it's just ready to go when I want to set up. And I do a lot of shooting from the road just because I don't like going and talking to people and asking for permission. So continuing, you want to prepare before you get home or leave home, and then make sure your lenses are clean because nobody likes cleaning dust spots up post-processing. If you are able to clean your sensors, clean them too. Double check your equipment bag, and then preset your camera to some settings. That way you don't have to fumble around in the dark, and make sure you have a card in your camera. That may be a learning experience for myself because I've gone out a few different times, either not had a card in my camera, a card with me, a battery, or a lens because I thought it was all in my bag. So always double check the stuff that you have so that way you make sure when you get out, you have everything you need. What to wear? You want to be prepared for whatever kind of weather conditions it's calling for, um, whether it's cold, warm, and we'll talk about the difference between being out in the different elements. You want to try and wear dark colors, especially if you're going to decide to walk in front of your lens. So I always wear at least a black shirt, and then I usually have jeans or dark colored sweatpants on. Gloves if it's cold outside. A hat. I always wear a hat except today. I was in the middle of stuff and got frustrated, and my hat's sitting over on the bed over here. And sturdiness. You have to have something that's sturdy. Um, so that's why having a decent tripod's really great. The cheap ones from like Walmart and stuff that are kind of plastic and metal and everything, they'll work if that's all you can afford. I know the Autorama one I have, the 3-pod one, I didn't think it would really work well for a full frame camera because the ball head isn't that sturdy and it has a weight limit and things like that. So always make sure that the equipment you have you can work with together because tripods have weight limits, ball heads have weight limits. So make sure that you know that if your camera's decently heavy, that your ball head can hold it. And always have a starting point and adjust from there. That way you know where you start and know where you end. So the next time if you go out and photograph it again, you'll know where you can start at then. Like I said, it's a lot is photographer preferred. I used to shoot a lot wider. Now I'm shooting a little more zoomed in. It just really depends where I'm at and what I need to photograph. And then manual focus or autofocus. This is really a big question because you have a few different, you can manual focus to infinity, which should put everything in focus. And then there's some hyperfocal distances, which is a little more technical on how to figure them out per different lens, or autofocus. So I ideally try and autofocus anytime I'm out, especially if the moon's out. You can always autofocus your camera on the moon and then switch it to manual focus because that'll put it to the infinity. Or if I have anything 20 feet or greater away from me, I'll get a flashlight out and light it up and then focus on it and switch to a manual setting. Probably not some of the smartest stuff, but it works for me. So I don't see why it wouldn't work for anyone else. But there's manual focus lenses out there. They're, from what I understand, like the Samyang brand and stuff like that. They're great for night photography. I'm in a few astrophotography groups on the Facebook, and a lot of people use those lenses, and they're all manual focus. So I've never used any of them, so I really can't vouch for them. And then you can also use your live view and manual focus on your camera to make sure that everything's getting into focus. All right, I guess I added some weird little things in here. And then the next thing's have fun. Like that's what we're going out to do if we're photographing at night. Usually you want to go out, have fun, be safe. So just enjoy your time out in nature or in the urban. Location scouting. So the photo in the top left is a bur oak tree in McBain, Missouri. It's 300 plus years old. It's very well known in mid-Missouri. And I photograph it a lot because it's close to me. I can shoot the Milky Way there, things like that. Recently, it was struck by lightning, so we don't know how much longer it may live. The photo in the top right, I photographed out of the front room of or the front driveway of the house I used to live in Columbia. So even in an urban setting, in a subdivision, you can still photograph the stars. The bottom one is somewhere in the middle of Alaska while I was snow skiing. So, or cross country skiing. So sometimes you have to go a little bit further out to find what kind of location you want. Obviously, it's not night photo. Probably wouldn't like to be out where I was there at night because I'd probably get eaten by a bear. So I do a lot of scouting during daytime. This gives you a good view of what can be in the foreground, what's in the background, and you can actually, if it's a location you can be at, get out, take a photo so you can actually see what your composition looks like. A lot of times I just go driving around just because I get bored and I'm like, well, let's go photograph something. And then I'll find a location I like during the day, and then I'll go back at night and photograph the same place. And then points of interest. What do you want in the foreground? What do you want? So on this photo, it's shot with a DxO1. That's a camera that's about, oh, I don't know, this big. Has a 1-inch Sony sensor. It plugs into the iPhone. It's like a camera attachment for the phone. I think I just set the camera in my phone, angled my phone where I could set it in the grass and just photograph this. And I thought it came out really well. The one little piece here I didn't like, but I'm not too good at Photoshop and was like, I'll leave that. And then do you want to avoid the artificial lighting, light pollution, or not? It's really up to your preference. I shoot a lot of stuff that has a ton of light pollution. I really don't worry about it. I live in an urban environment. So I just go ahead and photograph it. At the same time, when I can avoid it, it's great because you get more detailed stars and everything pops a little bit more in the sky. And then as we talked about earlier, to trespass or not, I wouldn't suggest it unless, you actually know the person, you don't think they're going to do anything to you. Maybe, but otherwise, it's just not a great idea because the last thing you want is a cop pulling up on you and being like, what are you doing? Because that kind of gets your heart pumping. Had that happen one time. He's like, oh, just making sure you didn't hit a deer, and went on his way, thankfully. And composition. So there's a lot of different ways we can compose things. We all know if we photograph the people, you can turn them, you move the camera a little bit, change the composition and everything. So I think this has a few different compositions on it. So a lot of times I have my tripod as low as it'll go to the ground to photograph because I like shooting up a little bit. As I said, this was photographed in Alaska. This was in Cape Cod. And then I light painted on the boat. And I was photographing low to the ground. Here again, I photographed this low to the ground. One nice thing for me with this photo, I actually had this in an international art gallery in St. Louis. That's kind of nice for me. I actually was able to show in an international art show with it. That was my goal 3 years ago, was to get in an international art show. And for some reason, they like this photo. The one thing about this photo is you see the star trails, and then you see all these little wiggly lines through here. That's all the people who are walking up and down the beach with flashlights or their lights on their camera. So that's something else. Like if you're in a public place, you have to watch out for other people, as you may get things like that. And then here's some fireworks down here. one was also in Cape Cod. That was a night that they said, "Oh, the northern states may be able to see the northern lights." I was like, "All right, I'll stay out and photograph." But I didn't. I was able to see the stars, shot a silhouette of myself, and you'll notice a little bit. I'd shoot a lot of self portraits of myself at night because nobody usually goes out with me, so I get bored and decide to stand in the photo. There was a church. It was a very foggy night. Has artificial lighting. This was, I think, I just added a little contrast in Lightroom, and everything else was the in camera. Then having an old farm implement in your foreground, and then shooting the stars. This is you can see the different planes in here, and you can tell when you're photographing at night. You can tell the difference between planes and like shooting stars, because planes you'll see the dots, and that's the lights as they flash on and off. Whereas like a shooting star is just a straight line like that.
What time is this at?
Probably like 9 o'clock at night. I shoot early in the night. I don't like staying up late. So yeah, it's probably between 9 or 10 at night. Which right now, as we all know, it starts getting dark at like what, 5 o'clock now, it seems, with the whole daylight saving stuff. So 9 o'clock at night, it'd be pitch dark. But this is in St. Charles, which is on the where this farm is in line with St. Louis Lambert Airport. So there's not a photo I could photograph there without getting planes in it, unless I stayed up to like 3 a.m. and then the Las Vegas flight. Always nice thing about shooting at night and long exposures, you can photograph fireworks, so you can see the whole fireworks. The issues sometimes you'll run into is the highlights or why it's being blown out. I was in Panama City, I believe. And photographed this the same night I got yelled at by the farmer because I was playing with fire by the corn. And he's like, "You light my corn on fire, we're going to be in trouble." Luckily, I was photographing with his daughter, so she's like, "Dad, just go away." But to photograph the car here, I went ahead and used, I think I had a 4x6 softbox that we used just because we're playing around at night and didn't really have much else going on. So, and then there's a speed light inside the car as well. Photographed this off the back deck of an old house I lived in. I think I set the camera up, and this was over maybe 30 minutes, and that's how far the star trails can go in that amount of time. And that's from, looks like 2015. Then tripods. This, forget what brand this tripod was, but it obviously could get in a whole bunch of different positions, which was really cool. I didn't like the ball head on it, so I got rid of it. But it's really nice getting low to the ground, changing your composition. Because as a photographer, you see stuff differently than the normal person. Most people just take their iPhone like this and shoot right at the eye level. So if you can create something differently than everyone else, you might have a chance on making some money with it. Must have been a lens cap or something. And then sturdiness is a must, so you really want to get a sturdy tripod. And photographing in the sand, I always push my tripod down into the sand. That way, like, it doesn't, with the camera where it is here, it'd be leaning over and adding pressure to that one leg, which could gradually sink it. I photographed here for I don't know how long that day. I was in the same spot for sunset until like 10 o'clock at night, so I could photograph the stars as well. And Sometimes you just want the tops of some sunflowers. And here, to get the angle I wanted, I had to sit it on some wood, which are all different levels. So it worked out well for me. I ended up shooting a time lapse here, and I don't think I ever put it together. And I also have these little platypod tripods. They're just a flat sheet of metal. And I have a small one like this and a larger one. But they work great for when I travel because they have little footprints, easier to fit in a bag, a lot lighter weight than a tripod. You just have to take a ball head with you. So there's a lot of different options. And then you have, your gorilla pods with the legs that bend all different ways and things like that. The issue I've had with one of them, which wasn't the Gorilla Pod brand by Joby, was a cheaper one. They just, after a while, they just seemed to sink and they wouldn't keep their position well. And these ones will kind of work. After so long, I noticed because I tested one out. After you tighten it so many times tight so it doesn't move, you won't be able to tighten it anymore. And you'll either break the plastic ring that the tightener goes into, or it'll just keep screwing and the threads are lost. And then your camera tilts forward or tilts backwards. And then aluminum tripods versus carbon fiber tripods. I've been asked why I use carbon fiber. I've been asked why I use aluminum. Honestly, carbon fibers are lightweight, easier to travel with, especially if you're, going hiking, things like that. Aluminum's heavier and can be a little more sturdy sometimes. But generally, most newer tripods now have a hook that is at the base of the arm here. So you can hang your book bag or things like that on it to help keep it sturdy. But I do enjoy my Manfrotto tripod, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything. It works well for what I do. And a sturdy ball head. So that's probably one of the most important things is the amount of weight your ball head can handle with the camera you're using. A lot of the ball heads, once you get them so tight, that's as tight as they'll ever go, and your camera will still kind of wobble on it. So I have a Kurt Bead tripod or a ball head, and it works great for me. Well, it's expensive, but I had a another ball head. I don't remember what brand it was. It may have been the Autorama one. That even though no matter how tight you get it, your camera still is tilting every once in a while. So you don't want that when you're, in the middle of a long exposure shooting the stars, and then your camera just slowly starts going down, and it's so slow that you don't notice it, but your photos do. And then you have these blurred lines going through your frame. And then your tripod plate. I've been actually having an issue with my tripod plate with the because I use the spider grip and spider hand strap, and you can see it right here. It goes underneath the plate for your spider holster, which now I have a different spider holster one. To get it tight, mine just won't tighten all the way, so I have to figure a way to fix it a little bit. But these screws need to be tight, because if they're not, and you turn your camera vertical and you want to shoot like a portrait instead of a landscape, sometimes your camera will just tilt forward. Yeah, well, tilt down because of the weight of your lens. So always make sure before you go out that that's tight, because the last thing you want is having to find a screwdriver or a quarter or whatever you use to tighten it in the middle of the dark. And a lot of people don't plan for that, so they don't have the tool or quarter to do that, because the US has a chain shortage right now, so you might not even have quarters. And then, like I said, this is a platypod. Works really well if you want to get really low to the ground. And your intervalometer or shutter release.
Can you show that platypod again?
Yeah.
I just don't. I can't wrap my head around that. That thing's so small that would hold a big camera. I just.
It, you know, it's crazy, but it does, because that's the 5D Mark III with a Sigma 20 lens. So it, as long as you get the screws at the bottom here at the right height or distance, mainly height, to make it stable, it works. So they make a larger one that's probably 3 times the size of this that works a lot better than this one.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think this was mainly because it was kind of back down into the snow and the snow was packed, so it wasn't really going anywhere. The shutter release cables, I've had one for every camera I own. I have one for my Canon G15, just in case there's something that I want to photograph. And something I've been getting into a little more is daytime long exposures using ND filters. So you always want to have these, but like I said, my 5D Mark III, I didn't have that an app on my phone that I could use to use as a shutter release or anything. Then I got the trigger trap, which is a cable that hooks to a little module that you set in your hot shoe, and I was able to use that, but it's still something that plugs into the camera. So the nice thing about these is you can use it as a shutter release, an intervalometer, so it'll every so many seconds will take another photo, or you can time them to, put your camera on bulb mode and take as long an exposure as you want to. So they have a few different purposes. I think there's a few other things on them. I don't really use the rest of them. And I always turn there's a little music note here. I always turned off the little music note because the little beeping sound always got on my nerves at night. Setting up your camera. This is what I do. Recently, I've been shooting RAW and JPEG files together because I can download the JPEG files right to my phone and edit them on the go, whereas the RAW files, my phone says it's incapable or something. But I only do that so if I know what I'm shooting, like when I'm on vacation, I want to get them to my phone because I don't take a laptop with me. So I take them to my phone and then I edit them in Lightroom Mobile. And then you want to set your ISO, which I'll get to starting points here in a little bit. Set your white balance, which we'll go over as well. And then turn the brightness of your viewfinder down. The biggest thing is with the bright viewfinder and the dark sky, like I said, your pupils constrict and then dilate and constrict. It starts taking your eyes longer to adapt to your environment. And they say that using a red light instead of a white light at night helps your eyes adapt. I've used a red headlamp once, and I've been wanting to buy one. I have one on an Amazon list, and I have yet to buy it, and just for no other reason than being lazy. Oops. Raw files, like I said, we want to shoot raw files because we can pull the most data from them. An issue that I noticed with my S1R is the raw files are so big. And with like my MacBook Pro, it's a little bit older, only has a 256 hard drive and only 8 gigs of RAM. So starting to run Photoshop, like Lightroom and Photoshop in these large files, it fills up your scratch disk fast or startup disk, whichever one it is. And then you have to start closing stuff, restart. So you just have to know how much memory you have with these newer cameras that are shooting 40 and 50 megapixels because you're going to run out of memory quickly. I know with my 32 gig card shooting RAW and JPEG, I could fit, I think,
Hey, baby.
320 photos.
Do you still have an extra?
Sorry about that. You're good.
Oh, okay. So, you know, these new Sony cameras, Panasonic cameras, the new Canon R5, like, they're great cameras, but the file size is just every new camera is getting larger and larger. And if you start thinking about it, you know, your 32 gig card now fits what a 16 gig card did on your other camera, like an older camera. And then you go to download them, now your 1 gig or 1 terabyte hard drive fills up 6 times faster than it did with your other camera that shot smaller files. So that's something that you have to figure out, you know, even with getting the new cameras is, you know, all the memory space that you're going to need, and then the amount of time it's going to take you to post process, because the file size is larger. It makes your computer run slower as well. So sometimes I'll shoot a medium raw file instead of the largest raw file I can, just to save space and time for me, and it makes me a little bit more efficient. And then set your ISO, which I told you I have some slides. That, and then white balance. This I stole off of Google somewhere, and it just gives you a good Kelvin rating on the different white balances, the different lighting, twilight, and things like that. So I usually set my camera at, what was it? I think 6100 Kelvin when I photograph at night. I think that's what it was. And then turn the brightness down on your viewfinder. So setting up your camera, like I said, you can use exposure mode. You can use manual or bulb. Every once in a while, I'll use aperture priority. And the reason I use aperture priority is to take one photo, see what it says it thinks the actual exposure time needs to be, and it is never right. I just like to see what the starting point. Usually it's about, I don't know, 3 or 4 stops off of what it needs to be, because a lot of times it depends on what your focus mode is and things like that. If you're automatically focusing, if you're manual focusing, sometimes it works a little better. Bulb setting is good for when you want to take, you know, 30 seconds isn't a long enough photo for you. You want to take like an 8-minute long exposure to just have one photo, get your whole star trail in there in 8 minutes and be done, which is possible. Then definitely want to turn off your image stabilization. I should have added a photo to show you what it looks like, because all the stars will look like Z's in your photo because the image stabilization is still going and it vibrates inside your camera. So nowadays, not only do you have to worry about it on your lens, but you have to worry about it on your camera body with the newer cameras. And it took me a few minutes to turn off mine on my S1R the first night I went out, because I didn't prepare. And I forgot that there's an in-camera stabilization. So you need to turn that off as well. But then if you go back to shooting portraits in it or sports and stuff, you want to make sure you turn it back on for whatever you shoot during the day. So it's kind of remembering to turn it off, turn it on. It was really nice when it was just on the lenses. And then shutter speed. You want to shoot slower or faster? A lot of people don't realize that, you know, shooting the moon at night, you really don't shoot that slow. You're usually up to like 1/500th of a second if you want to shoot the moon, because you want to grab those details. If you shoot any slower, you overexpose the moon and you can't see any of the details in it. And focusing your lens. So this little sideways 8 here is infinity. So you can line your camera up and shoot infinity, or a lot of like my Panasonics, if I move the manual focus ring, it shows up on the viewfinder of where infinity is. And finding your focus. What do you want to focus on? Do you really want the stars in focus, or do you want what's in the foreground focus? Sometimes, you know, I'll want all the stars in the background to just be a blur or have that little bokeh look. And I want, let's say, the tractor in the foreground and just the tire of it in focus, say. So you know, just figure out what you want to create and go for it. So I think my focal point in this camera was a stop sign, because I really wasn't sure what else I wanted to focus on. And this is in downtown Old St. Charles in Missouri. I just got out of my car. No cars were coming around. Decided to photograph it. Here's the larger platypod that I was talking about, Susan. It has a bigger frame on it, which is a lot more stable. And then live view focusing. Oh, I don't know what that was. Sorry, they're doing construction behind my house. Live view focusing works well because as soon as you, at least on a few of the cameras I had, move the focus ring, it'll zoom in. Or you can zoom in on what your focal point is and make sure it's in focus. I haven't done a lot of live view focusing recently, mainly because I've been able to autofocus on something and then switch to manual focusing, which is usually what I try and do. Like I said, I will always find something 15 to 20 foot away because that'll put your camera at infinity, or your focus at infinity. Use a flashlight or something, or I'll even go set a flashlight down and focus on it and then set my lens to manual focus. Astro Milky Way stuff. There's no Milky Way in this photo, so I don't know why it's here. So set your camera on manual mode and then work with it. So this was shot with that little DX01. It was a 15-second exposure at ISO 800 and f2.0. This is just probably 15 miles from where I live. It's not far from town. And you'd be surprised how often you can catch the Milky Way, even with all the light pollution. So starting out, I always start at ISO 1600 and work from there. So this photo here is obviously at ISO 2000. It's 30 seconds. And as you can see, it's a 16 millimeter lens, but here on the edges, even in here, you can see that the stars are kind of trailing. That's because a 30-second exposure probably was a little bit too long for it. So I should have bumped my ISO up and dropped the shutter speed. Or I could have opened the lens up to 2.8. And then for settings, the shutter speed, I always start at between 15 and 20 seconds. Majority of the time, I'll start at 15 seconds and work my way up. Just because I'll just set my camera before we go out. So this photo here is shot at 40 millimeter. We were out in my friend's field because there was supposed to be a meteor shower that night. And I caught one. One. And then your f-stop, you know, open it up as far as you can. Or you can't, I mean, f4, I shoot a lot of stuff at f4. So that works out really well for me. And a lot of time, even if I have a lens that'll shoot f2.8, I'll shoot at f4 because a lot of the lenses, the sharpest f-stops not wide open, it's a few stops less. White balance. It says I started 3900 here, but I don't think I've done that for a while. I usually shoot at 6100. And this image here was light painted with a flashlight, and I just gently went over it really quickly with the flashlight. Then you can, all the cameras have, most of them have 2 to 10-second timers on them. So you can use that if you don't have a shutter release with you, or you can use your shutter release, or like I said, now there's all the Bluetooth apps and things like that you can use as well. Even though, a lot of times people are like, well, it's a long exposure. If you push the shutter without using a timer or a shutter release, the camera will still wiggle just a little bit in the beginning and blur the stars. And you can always do multiple compositions from one place. So here you see that I just walked probably 10 feet, maybe 15 feet, turned a little bit, and I got a different composition. So it's nice that if you do have something in the foreground, you can just walk a little bit, change your composition, and get something completely different. Bracketing, does it work at night? If you want to do some Photoshop work, it will work because you can expose your foreground in one photo and expose the stars in another and blend them together. I'm not that great at Photoshop. I do most of my stuff in Lightroom, so I don't try and do that often. But it is possible if you want to try it. So star trails and moon trails. All these settings are about the same, but with star trails, I will shoot at least a 30-second exposure, no matter what focal distance I'm at, because I'm trying to get the star to trail. Whereas with a lot of stuff, I have a slide in here that gives us the math problem to know what shutter speed we need to use for our lens length. But with star trails, you want to start at 30 seconds. If you have an intervalometer or the apps or anything, put your camera on bulb mode, shoot for 1 minute and see what you get. Shoot for 2 minutes, see what you get. Shoot for 5 minutes, leave the shutter open and see the different star trails you can get. Just F steps, wide open. Sorry, some of this repeats. And then you can set your timer on the camera or shutter. Light painting. I do enjoy light painting a lot because a lot of times if you want to get everything in camera, you can just add a little bit of light here or there on different details, and it'll bring out your foreground in your photo for you. And then you can, it's primarily at night, and I do all mine outdoors. You can do it indoor as well. And then it makes a little bit more dramatic. I was driving down the road and just photographed something for 30 seconds. But your results will always vary, and sometimes they're not optimal, like this photo. And then you need the right atmospheric conditions, because if it's hazy, foggy, there's a lot of moisture in the air, the light will reflect off all that and give you all the haze in your photos. The right tools. So I use my iPhone to light paint a lot of stuff at night with. I use and then I use my hand to control the light over it. So I can, make a fist, have the light shine through my thumb and first finger, and then I can close my hand or open it up to allow the light I want. I also use different flashlights and my headlamp as well. So there's an assortment of flashlights. There's also a whole bunch of different light painting tools. This is the L wire I was talking about. It's neon wire tubes. They're really fun to make a whole bunch of different things with. Excuse me. These are light sticks that are used for camping. They're not the ones you break and shake up like all kids like. They just turn on. But I've seen people use these they'll add a float to them, toss them in like a waterfall, and they'll go down the waterfall and have the light go through the water. But you can use any light source that you can, and decide what you're going to light paint. Fortunately, this night was a full moon, and the only thing I had to light paint was inside the shed here, which you can't really see much detail in. But here I was able to, I used a flashlight to get the fence lit up and the tree, but the tree is a little blue because the color balance wasn't set evenly for the my camera and then what flashlight I was using. And the way I look at it, it's like dodging in Photoshop. You're just trying to lighten up a little bit of area so that way you don't have to go back in. Sometimes you might have to burn it though if you get it too bright. A flashlight can use to brush or sprinkle light. There's also a whole bunch of different modifiers you can buy for flashlights to help with this. They actually have brushes you can put on flashlights and a whole bunch of other tools that you can use. And then if you want to use a speed light, flash, things like that, you can also use those depending on your locations. And then setting up. So light movement, you can, this is how to use light painting. So you can use, light moves, like kids with sparklers. You just spin something around or do it really simply, or controlled light sources where you can control all the different settings and how bright and things it are. So every once in a while, you just have a Johnny on the spot in front of you when you're. I light painted that with my iPhone. Test shots. Majority of my first shots are always test shots because I have a starting point and then I work from there. So I do a lot of test shots. I mean, majority of my portrait work, which is very little, I do a test shot just to see where I'm at. This I photographed with the L wire. So the camera was on a 30-second exposure. It was actually in a studio, had it pitch black, and one of my friends just spun it all the way around me. And then I just flipped the photo to make it kind of look a little cool. It's kind of, I enjoyed having it. It's a lot of fun to play and see what kind of stuff you get with it. And then controlled light sources. This is where I used my hand around the light and controlled exactly where I wanted the light to go. So these are the same photos here. I added a little bit of light here, whereas before it was pitch black like this. And then you want to set your tripod at the desired height you'd like to shoot at. Nowadays, I mean, I'm not old by any means, but the older I get, the more I don't want to bend down. So I've been setting my tripod at least eye level for anything I've been shooting, just because I don't want to bend down anymore. And like I said, find your location before you set up all your equipment. It'll make things go easier for you, because otherwise you might be hunting around at night for, a location to photograph at, and you can't find anything because you don't know what's in the foreground, what's in the background, things like that. Put your camera on the tripod, compose your scene. You may need a light to compose your scene, so that way you see exactly what you're doing. And how hard is it to set up during the night? If you don't have a flashlight, it looks just like this, pitch black. But I always scout during the daytime. And then, the angle to shoot at, like, do you want your camera angled up a little bit? Do you want it level with the horizon line. It's all preference. And you can set up and photograph stuff. A lot of times, since I shoot a lot of more urban stuff too, I always have to deal with car lights or street lights as we see here. So knowing how to just angle your camera just a little bit so you don't get a glare from them. And when I photograph, I make sure that I don't have cars that are able to drive in and shine their lights right in front of or right into my camera. So here's some different compositions. I'm standing almost in the exact same spot for these. The top one, I shot a panorama that's 6 photos across. This bottom corner, I just angled the camera down. I think it was about 3 foot over from this one. This one was just angled up. I angled up just because I wanted to make sure I got the tops of all these trees. Here's something I light painted for Sync Sports. I just thought it was really cool because you can write letters with flashlights and things like that. So, a lot of times if you want to take a portrait at night, you can write stuff on it as well. So you can create some pretty cool things with it.
Are you in front of the, so go back to that one. Are you writing the words backwards? Are you in?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
writing the words backwards. So especially recently, I've been very good at writing stuff backwards because since I'm working in the COVID unit, the doors are closed and they're all glass. So to communicate with people outside, we write backwards.
Oh,
So yeah, you kind of have to think about it when you go about doing it on how to write it backwards. But it works. And if you notice, you can see somebody here. Whereas if they were wearing black, you probably wouldn't have seen them. So live view focus. I used to do that a lot more than I do now, mainly because I have been auto focusing on. So now some shooting conditions you're going to run into is issues with the cold. A lot of times, going from hot to cold, your lens is going to fog up. After a while being outside, your lens is going to fog up. So you can buy, let's see if it says, no, I guess I don't have anything. But so I have this photo. There's no real fog on it. In this photo, you can see here in the center, right above the plane, I was starting to get a fog spot on my lens. That's because my lens had been outside for, I don't know how long I sat outside, probably 3 or 4 hours. And after so long, the moisture started freezing inside the lens on the glass. So you can buy just a hand warmer heat packs and you can put them on your lens to keep it warm, to keep it from doing this. And just put a rubber band around them. You can go out onto the ice just before you do, make sure that the ice is stable. And then issues with the heat is your cameras can overheat and you can start getting hot spots in your photos from just continuously shooting, and that you'll get hot pixels. I've only ran into this 1 or 2 times with my Sony. I haven't ran into it with any other cameras. Hot pixels I've gotten with my 5D Mark III from just continuously shooting. They'll show up as red and blue pixels when you upload your photos to. And issues with humidity. So going from the air conditioning outside, your lens like almost instantly fogs, just like glasses do. So that's something you want to be cognitive about if you're going to go outside and shoot. Set your camera outside for 5 minutes before you go outside. That way it can acclimate to the weather. But sometimes it'll give you a nice little haze and be a little different too. Then shooting conditions in the rain. That's, I mean, nobody really likes to be in the rain, but they make a whole bunch of different gear for the rain. You can also use this stuff if it's snowing outside to keep the water and wetness off your cameras. Plastic bags work, you know, whatever you have can work. I've seen people put coats over them. So really anything that you can use to keep it, your camera from getting damaged. So here's the rule I was talking about. It's a 500 or 600 rule. Depends who you talk to. You want to divide 500 or 600 by the focal distance of your lens or what millimeter you're shooting at. And the number you get is the longest shutter speed that you're supposed to use. And it keeps you from getting star trails. So take 600, divide it by whatever focal distance you're using, and you can, it gives you how long you can leave the shutter open before the stars trail. This photo was by Colin McElman. He lives in Kansas. And he's the one who I actually learned about that from. So some things to look out for. You're in public places, you gotta watch out for other people. You know, you don't want to be rude to them. You want to be polite so that way you can get what you want done and then leave. And then you also can't get mad if you know you're in public and people are walking through your photos like you're on the beach or something like that. So that's one of the biggest things. You know, just be mindful, polite, and just try and stay out of other people's ways because people are like, you're in my way. Everybody gets frustrated sometimes, so just remember your safety. And then always know where your equipment is and keep it close, especially in public areas, because everybody likes to walk off with camera equipment these days, it seems. That was one of my biggest concerns when I was out in Oregon and we were hiking. I had a bag with minimal equipment in it in our car, but I was always worried that somebody was just going to break the side window and take my bag. So if you're out photographing, make sure you know where your equipment is. You don't want to leave anything. I know I've seen posts where people are like, I found this lens at this park. Does anybody know a photographer who was there yesterday or something? So this way you go out with everything and you come home with everything. And people might wander into your photos. If you're near the roadway, you know, you're going to deal with car lights, tail lights, and probably should wear a safety vest if you're on the side of the road just to keep yourself safe from getting hit. Especially at night, we have to worry about, you know, not only impaired drivers or teenage drivers who are just learning to drive, which is any time of day, but like impaired drivers, the last thing you want is to get, you know, run over while you're on the side of the road. And then a little checklist. Another thing with, you know, all things to look out for is if you're out in the wilderness, you know, you're not the number one dog anymore. You know, you have bears, moose, elk, wolves, mountain lions, things like that. So if it's legal to carry a gun or a taser or whatever you feel that you can keep yourself safe with, you might want to do that as well. But just make sure you're comfortable with whatever device you have with you. So a little checklist is you want to shoot in RAW. Set your ISO before you go out. Use manual settings. Set your shutter speed. Set your aperture. Turn off image stabilization. And then have an organized bag. This is probably the one thing I do not do well, is have an organized bag, because I have camera, my lenses, a tripod in my bag, probably a drone that I don't even use when I go out at night, but it's in my bag. Assortment of lenses, probably have a speed light or two. I take too much stuff with me usually when I go out. So organize your bag before you go out. That way you only have minimal stuff that you actually need with you. It'll make your life much easier when you realize that everything that you thought you had is actually at home. And then you might want to make a little checklist of what's in your bag before you leave to make sure you grab and have everything with you when you go home with everything you brought.
Daniel, there's a question on camera settings. Do
Okay.
you turn on or leave off your long exposure noise reduction? And what about high ISO noise reduction?
So I turn off all the noise reduction on my camera, mainly because on the Panasonics with the noise reduction, however long your exposure is, it noise reduces for that amount of time. So it's that amount of extra time that I'm not allowed to shoot. So I turn all mine off because I just want to continuously shoot most of the time. Whereas, you know, if you wanted to use your noise reduction, you can do that. It just, I know on the Panasonic cameras, you shoot for 20 seconds, you wait 20 seconds till you can take another frame. And so for my efficiency and the way my workflow goes when I'm shooting, it doesn't work well for me. But it might work well for other people. I don't know. These two Panasonics are the first ones I've had that actually have the noise reduction stuff. So I'm still kind of getting used to having it, but I don't use it. Does that answer the person's question?
I think so. I think we're good.
All right, and then, like I said, double check to make sure you have all your gear before you go out and when you come home, because getting somewhere without a battery or a memory card or a lens, maybe a camera body, or maybe even your bag because you rushed off too quickly, or a tripod. Just make sure you have all your stuff with you. Well, I got through that a lot quicker than I thought. So some ways, if you want to network with me, my website no longer looks like this, but I ran out of time on to update it. It's danielberryphotography.com. And on Instagram, same thing. Facebook, same thing. It's all Daniel Berry Photography. Email at Gmail, because I haven't gotten one through my website yet. All those. And then I think, yeah, post processing. And unfortunately, I was going to edit a photo or two, but since my Mac won't let Zoom work for some reason, I won't be able to do that because my wife has a PC and has no programs on it.
Okay, I think we can let that one go. You've been working some long hours, so we get it. We really do.
You know, one thing about let me go to these photos here, somewhere up here. This will go faster. Majority of my photos are all edited, minus the star trails, because I'll use there's a few different programs you can stack your star trail photos into to combine them all if you shoot multiple photos to combine them. But majority of everything I edit is all in Lightroom. I don't do much in Photoshop. I try and get everything in camera if I can. Sometimes with the Milky Way photos, I'll take them into Photoshop because Orion X is a tool tab thing that you can buy specifically for the Milky Way, and it'll bring the details out more. But for me, a lot of times I don't have a lot of extra time to fiddle with Photoshop. Never been good with it, so I don't shoot portraits. I do a lot of stuff just all these were edited in Lightroom and they work for me. Likely, if I get more time, I'll take one of these into Photoshop just because this is the Milky Way here and try and edit it a little better. And if you are wanting to photograph the Milky Way, usually the Milky Way season's from like April to mid-October. It also depends what part of the United States is on the actual time on that. So you can always Google it. And Photo Pills is a great app. Let me pull it up real quick because that's on my phone and show you. Cancel. So, does everybody able to see me on the camera? Everybody see this? So, Photo Pills, I don't know if you can see that part, but it has all kinds of different apps. And I use the Night AR a lot. Oh, hold on. Let me take it out of my case because my case has magnets and it won't work with magnets for your compass. Oh, the wall was dark. But you can go by hour and see, like if you just move your finger along. No, you probably can't. There, maybe if I angle, no. You can
You said it's Photo Pill app?
Yeah, Photo Pills. But like you can drag your finger across like wherever you want to shoot. And as long as your finger goes across, it'll tell you what time the Milky Way is like in front of your camera. So it's pretty cool to, you know, have some technology that'll help you do things like that. So, are there any other questions? Let's see if I can figure out how to stop. Let's see, stop screen share. All right. Like I said, all the photo decks thing at the beginning was a thing I worked with them on. Not sponsored by anybody, so just go out and have fun at night. That's what I like to do. We'll chat there. I can see the chat now.
There's been a lot of chat going on. You're fine. I've been answering them for you. Does anybody, I mean, unmute yourselves, ask questions. This is your chance to ask him what you want to know. I think they're all zoomed out today.
I'm sure it's been a long day. Our kids are on Zoom right now for school, and our kindergartner doesn't fare well with Zoom. So,
Well, if anybody doesn't have any other questions, I think this is awesome, Daniel. We wanted an intro. You definitely gave us the intro because this is something I've been wanting to do, and
yeah,
we hope to do something like this during the summer if things get better. So
yeah, the biggest thing is just go out and have fun. You know, the starting point's the big thing. And I mean, it's just like, you know, using a light meter to set your lighting. It gives you a good starting point. And then if you do need to adjust, it's micro adjustments usually with that. So kind of look at it the same way. Like I get my starting point, and then usually it's either just changing my ISO or my shutter speed, and then I can just shoot for however long I want. So,
well, unless you guys got questions, Daniel, again, thank you. We recorded this. We